The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk, the Bronx's flagship television talk show. We have a political debate tonight, so there will be no phone calls, but you can always email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Tonight, it's the race for the Democratic primary in the 33rd Senatorial District, which includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Kingsbridge, Norwood, Fordham, Tremont, and Mount Hope. Unfortunately, the incumbent, Pedro Espada Jr., has declined the invitation to participate, so we are pleased to welcome the challengers. Mr. Gustavo Rivera, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Mr. Dan Paternak, thank you for joining us as well. Gentlemen, in tonight's debate, we will address a question to alternating candidates, and after the answer, there will be a short, free-flowing debate. The candidate who was originally asked the question will have the last word in each round. Each candidate will also have a chance to deliver a one-minute closing statement. Questions tonight include those submitted by the candidates themselves. As always, our objective is to give voters a chance to learn about who seeks to represent them. Before we begin, though, I want to offer commentary on Mr. Espada's absence. Not only has he declined the opportunity to appear, but he did not even have the courtesy to respond to our invitation, despite emails to assistants and numerous phone calls to his office. It's disrespectful and insulting to not only me personally and to BronxTalk, which has served the Bronx with distinction for 16 years, but also to the BronxNet television network and his worthy opponents who have enthusiastically joined us this evening. Most importantly, it's also a thumb nose to you, the voters, who deserve a chance to make an informed choice. So, gentlemen, we thank you both for your participation, and by prior agreement, the first question will be asked of Mr. Paternak. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks, Gary.
There's no escaping the political realities of this race. Your opponent, who's here tonight, received support from numerous unions, organizations, and elected officials. He's also raised considerably more money than you have. Assuming you, too, think the incumbent should be removed from office, I don't think that's too far an assumption to make. Doesn't your continued participation in the campaign complicate that possibility considerably? And though you say you oppose the incumbent, aren't you, in essence, playing right into his hands?
I'm not, Gary. This has been put out into the media quite a bit, especially by a lot of supporters for Mr. Rivera, that I am a spoiler. I am, in fact, not a spoiler. I think this is more of just a dirty political talk out there. I believe our district will come out. I believe the supporters on the other side are simply trying to get voters not to come out, my supporters not to come out, and at the end of the day, basically steal votes away from me. I don't believe in the spoiler routine. Second, I believe I am the main challenger in this race. While people are looking at money, the simple fact is my family has been in this district for more than 60 years. My brothers grew up here. My uncles grew up here. My parents and my family have worked in this district for a very long time. I have more in community capital than either Mr. Espada or Mr. Rivera, and that means a lot. I look at that as more than $1 million in capital in going through this race. Lastly, for the people who do bring up the spoiler comment, I say that's simply not democracy. At the end of the day, our process is to have a primary. Our process is for the voters to choose. I don't believe a select few people should intimidate candidates to get out of the race. I believe the voters decide, the power belongs to them, and any people who go otherwise are simply basically bringing down democracy.
Let me offer a follow-up, and then Mr. Rivera and both of you can discuss this particular point. There also were rumors that Mr. Espada had supported your campaign or had provided some personnel for the campaign. Is that the case? Has there been any input from him in this campaign?
That is absolutely false. It's more dirty politics meant to stray people away, meant to stray my supporters away. It is absolutely not true. As a matter of fact, Gary, 2 years ago, I worked on the case to knock Espada off of the ballot for residency. We knew he lived in Mamaroneck, and I worked on that case. I had just graduated from law school, and I had not yet been sworn in, so I worked underneath Louis Sepulveda, who was chief counsel at that time. I did a lot of research. I worked a lot to basically get Espada off of the ballot. Ultimately, the election law just isn't strong enough on that issue, though.
Mr. Rivera, now you can weigh in on this.
Well, first of all, Gary, I want to, again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here to talk to Bronxites today. Well, I think what's clear is, as you said, there is not only by his inaction of not showing up at this debate, but by his actions over the last couple of years, Mr. Espada has shown a disrespect to this district. And I think that there is a recognition across the district that there is a need for a change, that we need someone that can actually work for the people of this district and to get things done. Now, the supporters that I have on my corner, whether it's Ruben Diaz Jr., Bronx Borough President, who supported me today, former Borough BP, Fernando Ferrer, Council Member Oliver Capel and Cabrera, these folks are people who I want to work with in government. They have an understanding that if they want to get anything done in this district, to be able to address the concerns of the people of this district, whether it is for housing, healthcare, education, that we need someone that can go to Albany and get things done, and they want to be my partners in government. Because, Gary, at the end of the day, the issue here is not Mr. Espada. This is not about me. This is not about Mr. Espada. This is about the needs of the people of this district that have been ignored for far too long. And so the people that have supported me, whether it's the healthcare workers of 1199, whether it's the transit workers of TWU or the teachers of UFT, these are our neighbors. And these are the people who are in need of a representative. And we want to make sure that we go to Albany together to make the Bronx better for all of us.
I believe just responding to the endorsements thing, I think the majority of endorsements have basically been people buying into this hype. They've been buying into this fake hype that is out there. I'd like to note, Borough President Diaz and Assemblyman Dinowitz, I know, endorsed Mr. Rivera today. These are two men who I do respect because I know they do work a lot in the community, and I've worked with particularly Assemblyman Dinowitz on a lot of community issues before. I think it's something to note that they waited until this late in the game to actually give their endorsement, and I think that says that they had serious reservations about giving their endorsement to Mr. Rivera. At the end of the day, I think most of the endorsements, they just want anybody but Espada, and I think a lot of people are just buying into the hype rather than looking at the best candidate, which is me.
Did you want to respond, or we'll leave it at that?
This is not about hype. This is simply about what is best for the people of this district. And whether we're talking about, again, the healthcare workers all across this district, we have more hospitals in the 33rd Senatorial District than in any other district across the state. Montefiore, Bronx Lebanon, St. Barnabas, the Veterans Hospital. These are, for example, hospitals that not only serve the community, but people that work there, the healthcare workers. They are supporting me. They want to make sure that healthcare cuts don't come to them. The teachers, UFT, they have also supported me. These are the folks that are going to be working with me up in Albany, as well as Assemblymember Dinowitz, as well as Councilmember Cabrera, and as well as Councilmember Capel, and Bronx Borough President Diaz Jr. These folks want a partner in Albany to get things done.
You get the final word, yes.
Interesting enough, I mean, in talking about local community issues, between the two challengers, I am the only one who really has gotten involved in community issues. At the end of the day, when 3469 Cannon Place came up, supportive housing, a 90-unit building on a small residential street, Mr. Rivera was not around. When the Jerome Park Reservoir issue came up 15 years ago when they wanted to put the Croton filtration plant there, my family was out there fighting. My family was out there rallying community support. Community issues, my family has been involved. I have been involved. I'm on Bronx Community Board 8. I get involved locally. I'm not looking to add to regular Albany mess. Albany's in ruins right now. It needs to be changed, and I'm the local guy who can do it for our community.
Mr. Rivera, let's, in a way, follow up on that. And Mr. Paternak talked about his investment in the community and his, what he called 30 years of capital. You don't really have roots in the 33 Senatorial District. Your own literature indicates that you have mostly lived and or worked outside of the community. Are you merely yet another outsider playing the role of political opportunist?
No, Gary. I came to New York originally from Puerto Rico about 12 years ago, and I've been living in the Bronx for the last 10. And a rent-stabilized apartment, the same one that I've had for the last 10 years. I'm actually the only tenant in this race, the only one who's been paying rent for the last 10 years. And in that time, in those 10 years, I have worked tirelessly both as an educator. I've taught for 3 years at Hunter College, CUNY, which is one of the reasons why I love coming to Lehman today, and in Pace University, where I've been teaching for 6 years. But I've also worked for elected officials from the local level all the way to the national. And the reason I have worked for these folks, the reason I have worked to make the Democratic Conference the majority in the state Senate, the reason I worked to make Barack Obama the next president of the United States is because I always believe that the values of the Democratic Party and the principles of the Democratic Party will lead to better policy that will have a positive impact on the communities that I care about, on the community that I live in. Whether it's healthcare reform, I fought to make sure that Barack Obama would be the next president, so we would have healthcare reform. Now we do, and now we need to be more proactive at the state level to make sure that we can implement the reform so that in 2014, when we have the healthcare exchange that's going to exist, we need to do a better job at the state level. We need to be proactive to make sure that healthcare reform happens and is implemented here right. That's the type of work that I want to do in Albany, and that's the type of work that I've always done during my career.
Sir, Mr. Panak, you want to respond?
Just briefly touching on the work, I haven't heard of anything in the community that Mr. Rivera has done. I too fought for Barack Obama. I voted for Barack Obama. I wanted him to be our president. However, let's talk about community issues. Mr. Rivera can't name anything that he's gotten involved in that he hasn't been paid for as a staffer for an official. There's nothing in the community that he has done personally. Touching on rent stabilization, I've lived in a rent-stabilized apartment on my own for more than 10 years now in the Shulam Aleichem houses. My mom lives in a rent-stabilized apartment. My brother lives in a rent-stabilized apartment. My 96-year-old grandmother lives in a rent-stabilized apartment. We all live in the Bronx. We've lived here a very long time. My family's been here for more than 60 years. We know the community. I'm going to fight for the community. I know the problems in the community because I share those problems of the people in the community. I'm not looking to make a name for myself. I'm looking to stay in the background and actually work and fight for our community.
Sir, you want to respond to that?
Well, the only thing I'll say again is that at the end of the day, this is about what the needs of this district are. This is about how to actually get things done in this district and be able to work in Albany to approve legislation that impacts this district positively. Now, as far as the work that I've done in the Democratic Conference, for example, in the Democratic Conference, we had, for decades, the Republicans controlled the Senate majority. And what that meant was that progressive legislation when it comes to education, healthcare, housing, it didn't go anywhere. And so the fight that I was part of to make sure that we would become a Democratic majority was for that, to make sure that the policy that the Democratic Conference can push for would have a positive impact on the community that I live in, the community that I care about, a positive impact for my neighbors. It is unfortunate, however, that Mr. Espada has chosen to take the majority and kind of play a political game with it. So at the end of the day, if we have a stable, trustworthy Democratic majority, we will be able to address the concerns of this district, education, healthcare, housing, and above all, make sure that the people of this state and this district know that they can trust government again. And those are the reasons why I want to go to Albany.
Mr. Paternak, Senator Espada has a troop of tenant advocates following him around, criticizing his housing initiatives, saying he's too connected to developers and their needs. Your family has been landlords and property owners, and you handle a lot of real estate law in your law practice. How can you convince constituents that you can advocate for tenants and not for landlords?
I guess we could start with basically my father and how he brought us into the real estate business. When my father started out, he was a tenant advocate at first. I want to say it's probably about 35 years ago or so. My father actually worked through Shulam Aleichem houses, brought the tenants together who were having difficulties at the time, and got a PLP loan for the property, at which point they made a lot of significant improvements in the building. My father was raised with the same belief that tenants first. My father always went out and he told people, I'm not perfect, I'm not the best landlord, but I do a lot of good. And anyone who knew my father, and most people in the community who were in apartments of his, knew when you're in trouble, you can go see Howie Paternak. Most people knew that my father carried a lot of tenants who fell behind in their bills and fell behind in the rent. My father would help these people, carry them until what they need. That carried forward with my family and I. You'll hear a lot of good stories about my father through the years throughout the Bronx. And it was just my dad. We were raised with the same values. And right now, I don't get involved in real estate management. The couple of properties that my family does own still, I really don't get involved in because I went back to law school and I switched careers. I love practicing law. I've got a lot of great cases out there. I do pro bono work. While I do real estate law, I do residential closings mostly right now, and I do landlord-tenant on both sides. I represent both landlords and tenants in that issue.
Mr. Rivera.
This district has almost 72,000 units of rent-stabilized apartments. and you have the chair of the Housing Committee, Mr. Espada, that for a couple of years has been sitting in that committee, or for the last year, has been sitting in this committee and has been sitting on legislation which would defend tenants. This is the reason why people like Jeffrey Dinowitz, people like Councilmember Capel, Councilmember Cabrera, and the borough president of the Bronx, Ruben Diaz Jr., want to work with me in Albany, because I am going to be defending tenants, as I am a tenant myself, and I want to make sure that we pass legislation that impacts tenants positively. My work in the Democratic Conference, to go back to it for 1 second, one of the people that I helped elect was Senator Andrea Stewart Cousins in Yonkers, and she is the main sponsor of legislation to get rid of vacancy decontrol, to get rid of the Ertstat law, which would make sure that the city has authority over rent stabilization. These are things that we need to do, and that the Housing Committee has not dealt with because Mr. Espada has not dealt with it. This is precisely why I want to go to Albany, to make sure that we change that.
Right.
I defended a tenant this morning in Housing Court in Manhattan. I defend tenants all the time. I help tenants all of the time. I do it on a community level. I know what the needs are. I know the laws. As far as legislation, I'm an attorney. I'm very well versed in housing. I'm very well versed in landlord-tenant conditions. I know what's out there. I know the people. I know the Bronx. I know the district. I know what people need. At the end of the day, I'm going to fight for tenants. I'm going to advocate for tenants. You actually had an interesting blurb today. I think it was on Facebook that you'd put out. I believe so.
If it's out there,
regarding
it's fair game.
regarding the housing conditions, not just affordable housing, but the conditions of the apartments in general. And I think you really need to look at that, and I completely agree that housing is tied to education, it's tied to crime. You have to look at all these issues, and you have to improve the conditions of the apartments. And at the end of the day, you need to look to enforcement, and you need to look to ways to actually improve and work with landlords. It's not about just going against landlords. You need to work with them. You need to bring them into the game. You need to negotiate with them, talk to them, let everybody talk together.
Mr. Rivera, let's move into health care and your Health Care for All plan. Mm-hmm. You've boasted of your support here on this show of President Obama. Your literature calls yourself a progressive. However, Mr. Obama compromised on health care. He compromised on the environment. At best, he's been a moderate on education reform, and many progressives are disillusioned with how he's handling foreign policy, in particular the war in Afghanistan. So your Health Care for All plan sounds great, but reality tends to settle in, as it did even with the president who you admire, especially when it comes to politics of health care in a politically divided state. Are you, like the president, a stated progressive, but ultimately a compromiser when it comes to getting things done?
Well, I think I worked very hard to make sure that the president would become the president, because I remember the 8 years that we had before that. And every time that I feel, and I have been somewhat disappointed at some of the things that the president has done. Overall, I think he has done a good job, and I'm still his supporter. When it comes to health care, I was an advocate of health care for all, of a system that covered everybody. And I do think that there were some compromises that were made there that I would have made a little bit differently, but I was not in the room. I know that the health care reform package that has passed does provide coverage for thousands of New Yorkers that would not have received coverage otherwise. So the health care plan for all that I proposed the other day has some very simple things in it. One of them has to do with the implementation of health care reform. The fact is that by 2014, this state has to be prepared to have a health care exchange so that we can present choices to the people of the state of New York on different health care packages that they should have access to. We're behind the ball on that. We need to go ahead. We have other states like California and even Connecticut that are far ahead of us on making sure that we implement these reforms. Also, to make sure that we address the issues of this district, like obesity, like diabetes, so that we can have a positive impact on the people of this district and their health care.
Mr. Paternak?
I think President Obama could have done far more for health care. At the end of the day, right now, for New Yorkers, health care legislation is more in federal hands than it is in state hands. I think as state legislators, what we need to do right now is protect the federal funding that we're receiving from Medicaid and Medicare and such. I believe that every American should have health care. Right now, I think the federal government really needs to step in and move forward on that level and moving legislation forward. But right now it's a monster, and I think we see a lot of politics getting in the way of progress when it comes to health care. On the state level, I'd like to fight for it bit by bit. through the community. As far as working on such cases like obesity and the Bronx definitely needs some reform with health, and I think we need to create incentives within our system. I know, for instance, like with insurance, a lot of insurance companies have incentives. If you go to the gym, say, 20 times in a 4-month period, then you receive a rebate on your insurance. Certain incentives, I'm not saying that's the one, but incentives for people to remain healthy. And one last thing that I definitely want to see is that children see a doctor at least once a year.
We'll give you the final word on this. We're running out of time, so I want to make sure that we can even get another question or two in.
Two quick things. First of all, part of my plan is actually, I think at the state level, we need to include weight loss programs as something that is covered under medical insurance. Currently is not. It's something that we could do at the state level, and I would make sure to do that. Second, the reason why I received the support of the nurses that take care of us, the New York State Nurses Association, the other healthcare workers and the work in hospitals, SEIU 1199, and the doctors and residents that take care of us, CIR, SCIU, these who are our neighbors and take care of us, they understand that I will make sure to go to Albany and fight to make sure that we do not have the cuts that we have had before, to make sure that the services continue to be provided for the people in this district, and that the folks in this district are not, my neighbors, are not impacted in a negative way by healthcare cuts.
Mr. Paternak, in offering a solution to high unemployment, you talked about training programs. It's
Yes.
a pretty easy answer, but is it based in reality? Who pays for them? Who implements them? You also mentioned tax incentives for Bronx businesses to hire Bronx. Nice, but really, how far does that go to fighting the Bronx's dreadfully high unemployment rate? Don't we need inventive thinking instead of basically the same things everyone else is saying?
We do need inventive things, and we need to sit down and especially talk to small businesses within the community, because I think what we're going to see economically, if we want to see a spur or if we want to see the Bronx getting help with its unemployment program, we need to reach out to the small businesses and put more money in their hands so that way they can hire more local people. When you look at the 33rd Senate District, you have a vast array of people who work in the district. There are a good number of people who are employed off the books, and you're also looking at a separate sort of economy there, which is supported largely by small businesses there.
I just wanted to make sure we have time for everybody. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that? Because I want to give them an opportunity to respond. We're talking about that.
I think as far as one of my first priorities will be responsible economic development and job creation. The people of the Bronx in this part of the Bronx have a 13% unemployment rate. 1 in 3 people believe that if the prices of their rents go up too much, they might become homeless. We need to address that. And I think it's telling that the Kingsbridge Armory, which is right in the middle of the district, and which was such a contentious issue last year, it is telling that the quote-unquote majority leader of the state Senate, Mr. Espada, did not choose to get himself involved in the middle of that. I think that we need to have some leadership there. I share some of the concerns of the community, but I think that maybe a little bit more could have been done to make sure that it didn't fall apart. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that something positive happens there that impacts the community positively all over.
We'll give you just a few
Just
seconds.
real quick, Mr.
Rivera
Rivera didn't get involved in that issue either. Again, we come back to what issues Mr. Rivera has gotten involved in the community, and the answer keeps coming back to a resounding none. He hasn't personally gotten involved in any issues in the community. Mr. Rivera is ultimately an outsider, and he's dealing with outsider endorsements here. We need somebody from the community who actually shares the concerns of the community and cares about the community.
You know what? It's an interesting statement, so we'll do that. And since you were asked, we'll get the final word on it. But did you want to? I'm sure you wanted to respond to that.
1199.
Rather than have me ask another question.
SEIU 1199 has endorsed me. These are healthcare workers that live and work in this community. UFT, the teachers, have endorsed me. These are our neighbors who work and live in this community. The Nurses Association, these are people that work and live in this community. These are the people that I am proud to receive an endorsement from.
Mm-hmm. These are the political units of these organizations. The actual people on the street haven't endorsed them. We're talking about the political units who are politically involved. They're just part of the mess in Albany. At the end of the day, I think you're going to see a lot of people in these unions come out and vote for me because they've seen me in the community, they know my family. You're going to see these people in these unions voting for me.
Real quick, because my producer's going to be very angry at me. Mayoral control, has it worked or has it not worked?
I think that some of the things that they did, it worked, but it needs more. It needs more.
Your thought?
I think 3 weeks ago when we saw the skewed test results, it did not work. I think what you saw was an abuse.
Gentlemen, we could go on, obviously,
Yes.
and I know the campaign will go on. I know there's a debate out in the field again on Thursday, and unfortunately, Mr. Espada apparently is not going to be there either. That's quite unfortunate. At this point, we'll allow each of you to deliver a closing statement by prior agreement. Mr. Padanek, you go first.
Yes, Gary, once again, thank you for having us on. I simply want to say out there to the people in the community, I am here for you. The entire thing about me being a spoiler is nothing more than dirty politics. It's meant to keep my supporters away from the polls, and it's meant to keep my it's meant to sway my supporters over to Mr. Rivera. You'll see the silent majority, the voters of this community will come out. You'll see the community capital that my family has built up over 60 years. I know the concerns of this community because I fought for the concerns of this community. You'll see me on the issues. You'll see me on the community board. You'll see me on the streets. I run around the reservoir 4 or 5 times a week. I'm out there in the community.
Thank you very much for your participation
Thank you,
tonight,
Gary.
something, again, the incumbent didn't see fit to do. Mr. Rivera, you get the final word of the evening.
Thank you, Gary. I wanted to just speak a second to the voters of the 33rd District, my neighbors. My name is Gustavo Rivera, and I'm running to represent you. I've been in New York for the last 12 years and in the Bronx for about 10, and it has become my home. Now, the district encompasses all of the Northwest Bronx, and there are serious issues that have not been addressed in the last 2 years. The incumbent, Mr. Espada, has failed, has been disrespectful to you, and has been an embarrassment. And I think that what we need to do is we need to go in a new direction. We need to make sure that we have somebody that works for you. At the end of the day, I want to be accountable to you. And this is why Ruben Diaz Jr., this is why Jeffrey Dinowitz, Oliver Capel, and Fernando Cabrera, Freddie Ferrer, these are folks that have worked for the Bronx through their entire lives. And they want to work together with me to make sure that we can make the Bronx better for you. So again, I want to work for you.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you again for joining us. It speaks very well of you, of your campaigns, and your respect for our Bronx voters as well as the democratic process. So we appreciate your time, and I know you both agree with me when I say everybody should come out and vote on September 14th.
Definitely come out and vote.
Folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of the show are available at blip.tv. Just search for Bronx Talk. Next week, we were to have a debate in the Assembly for the 80th Assembly District, but Assemblymember Naomi Rivera has declined the invitation to attend. So by default, the entire half hour goes to challenger Robert Giuffre. That's next Monday night at 9 here on BronxNet, Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios Channel 33. Special thanks to producer Jane Folloro, music director. No, he's our director, Michael Arias, and our cast of thousands up in the booth who are probably getting a good laugh right now. Good night.
Big dreams and good grades aren't enough to get into college. There are actual steps you need to take. Finding someone who can help is the first and most important. For the next steps, go to knowhowtogo.org.